Hello, my name is Mechagodzilla and today I am going to explain why I didn't direct The Last Airbender. At the time, my only filmmaking credits were Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Godzilla Tokyo SOS plus the 300 pornos I directed in college. I also had an uncredited advisory position in the principal photography of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is what got Paramount's attention from me. In my first meeting with them, I pitched to them a remake of When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth that would combine animatronics with CGI and would star several Playboy Playmates of the Year as the hot cave girls, but Paramount was too afraid to do a picture like that due to Disney's Dinosaur and Jurassic Park 3's financial and critical failures. I also pitched to them a Rampage movie that stars Bill Murray where Jonah Hill, Jon Heder and John Leguizamo would drink the soda and turn into the monsters and would have Red Man and Method Man as the comic relief sort of. Like Jay and Silent Bob, but when a demo reel was shot the CGI was almost as bad as Reptilians and the focus groups hated it. So they shelved the project, until they lost the rights to Time Warner. Finally I was approached to do a film adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. At the time, I knew very little about the series and on the outside it looked like a show that took itself way too seriously with its plot for what was supposed to be a Nicktoon, but after watching the whole series in my hot tub with several naked swimsuit models, I fell in love with the show but realized that I was a square peg for such a project and told Paramount that Wes Anderson should direct the film. My reasons are that Wes Anderson's use of colors, costumes and sets would be perfect for the aesthetic of the film, plus the plot of Avatar: The Last Airbender is basically the same as Moon Rise Kingdom, since both are about a little boy who runs away and meets the girl of his dreams, while a bunch of grown-ups are chasing him. Paramount appreciated my honesty but said that Wes Anderson wouldn't be a right fit, since he has no experience in taking charge of such a large-scale event film with fight sequences and big battle scenes, plus the way he would style the film might be too perplexing for younger audiences. I then suggested that Robert Rodriguez direct the movie, since he has been known to make interesting pictures with small budgets, and so long as there isn't a scene where Sokka tries to get Aang into the spirit world by breakdancing and reciting a Tibetan mantra, the movie would turn out fine. Again, there was a conflict of interest, since this was meant to be a big budget event film on par with Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings, and Robert Rodriguez would also not be a fit. I also suggested Ang Lee, but in retrospect an Ang Lee directed Last Airbender film might have had a lot of the same problems as the version we got, since his adaptation of the Hulk fell flat on its ass, but it wouldn't have mattered, since Ang Lee said no. So it befell to me, and I knew that if I failed to make a faithful adaptation, I would never hear the end of it from the fans. So casting started and I decided to do what George Lucas did with Star Wars and bring in a bunch of new blood, and reached out to multiple foundations for minority talent, since my plan was to have the Fire Nation be played by mostly East Asian actors, the Earth Kingdom be played by multiple ethnicities such as Asians, Indians, Filipinos, Polynesians and Middle Eastern people, and to have the Water Tribe be played by indigenous people. Due to there being a constant shift in production supervisors, I was able to get away with this for a time, and as soon as costuming and shooting locations were scouted, I was able to shoot 14 minutes of my version of the film. My version opened very similarly to that of the film's opening, only the full prologue was shown and not just the elements. We had storyboarded the prologue and had James Garrett come in to say the famous opening narration. We would then have a cinematic version of the Avatar theme play over my title. Originally I wanted to have my own distinct names for the trilogy, in which the first movie would be called The Boy in the Iceberg, the second movie would be called The Blind Bandit, and the third movie would be called The Fire Prince, but Paramount wanted consistent titles for all three films, since they wanted to appeal to a new audience. After several debates with the marketing department I conceded, fearing that they would keep a more watchful eye over the production, so my version of the movie would begin the same way Shyamalan's did, where Sokka and Katara are hunting, but when Sokka loses the tracks, instead of him stoically evaluating what he did wrong, Sokka would instead throw his spear to the ground and would grunt in gibberish that is supposed to be cursing, while kicking the glacier in anger. I even had Sokka's actor submerge his head in the freezing water for several takes, but when I showed the footage to the executives, they thought it played Sokka as too psycho. I agreed but knew that Sokka's actor would give me the evil eye for not using any of the water takes in the movie. After kicking his spear, Sokka would then shift the blame to Katara and this would spark an argument that would cause her to waterbend the glacier apart. The rest of the scene would play out similarly to how it did in the show. Now in my version of the film, Aang's airbender threads would be orange and yellow similar to that of the show, but what you may not know was that the movie tattoos were my idea. The patterns and symmetry were very impressive and added more depth to the airbender's culture. You wonder if the markings mean anything. Perhaps an ancient lithography that chronicles the lineage of the air nomads, or perhaps it is a prayer in tattoo form. Though Noah Ringer's range of emotions was okay, my Aang's performance had more energy to it and better captured the youth the character is supposed to have, while the Aang in the film we got didn't have any spells of pure joy and was constantly having sadgasms throughout the feature. I even helped my actor balance himself on a blue screen dolly that I would have been made into the air scooter post-production, but again, the executives thought that would be too expensive. I don't remember if his use of the glider or air scooter was in the released film, but that's only because of how forgettable the experience was. Their idea for the spirit world was literally a cave containing a dragon that could literally have been from any other fantasy movie. They didn't even try, but I digress. Anyway, the film would continue similarly to how the released film did, but instead of Zuko acting like a warlord and ordering the village to bring him all their elderly, the final draft of my script had it played out almost verbatim to the show, but I told the storyboard artists to go nuts with how it would be filmed, since I didn't want this to be a shot-for-shot remake of the cartoon. Plus, in early stages of the writing, I had thrown around an idea where Zuko and Uncle Iroh both exit the ship and do a good cop bad cop routine with the villagers, so Aang would go with Zuko to protect the village and Sokka and Katara would rescue him and would then go to the Southern Air Temple, while Zuko and Iroh would get their ship repaired and we would see the Anikai between Zuko and Admiral Zhao. And again, this would play out similarly to the cartoon with one big difference. When Aang goes into the Avatar state, he sees the vision of the comet and then passes out. At this point Sokka and Katara would take Aang to Kyoshi Island to seek a healer. This is where changes start to be made to both the animated series and the Shyamalan movie. For now, instead of going to Kyoshi Island just to ride the koi fish, it is used to move the plot along. Suki is introduced and we would see her briefly train Sokka in combat, similar to how in the Fellowship of the Ring, Boromir was briefly shown training Merry and Pippin. In a deep sleep, Aang would be contacted by Avatar Roku, who tells him of Sazin's comet. Back in the physical world, Katara would watch over Aang and would apply wet rag to his head, but the water would start to glow and heal him. Aang would spring awake and jump through the roof 30 feet into the air and would be good as new. The trio would take some time to collect what happened, but then Zuko would show up in his ship and start attacking the village, but the Unagi would encircle the boat and Aang and friends would get away. The three would talk about what to do now and Aang says he has to master all four elements and defeat Fire Lord Ozai before Sazin's comet returns, so they decide to go to the Northern Water Tribe to find a master. But before they do, Aang wants to do one thing with them, and with that they go to Omashu to use the mail system as a slide, but are caught by the soldiers and taken to King Bumi. Now to save time, Aang would immediately recognize Bumi and they would reconnect after 100 years. The two would then walk through Omashu and Bumi would tell Aang details of the war. Basically a better written version of what Katara told Aang in the Shyamalan movie, since Bumi would know more about it and it would be a little more detailed, like maybe he can explain that the Earth Kingdom was never that unified and it allowed the Fire Nation to conquer the nation piece by piece over the decades. Bumi would then promise to train Aang once he masters waterbending, and with that the gang would leave. Now in the Shyamalan movie, they skipped all this and went from the Southern Air Temple to Imprisoned, which isn't a bad episode to adapt but was an episode that was adapted badly for reasons people already said 100 times. However, if you're going to adapt any episode that is between the water tribes, Jet is the more logical choice, since Haru's character arc resolved at the end of one episode, but Jet's arc took more twists and turns as the series progressed, and with apologies to all the Haru fangirls, his exclusion from the story changes nothing. He's briefly with the gang in season 3 but doesn't really do anything other than grow a mustache and shoot the breeze with Duke. Sorry, I mean the Duke. So anyway, the second act would begin and again more changes would happen, since Katara learns to heal sooner in the story. When Jet and the Freedom Fighters help the trio fight the Fire Nation soldiers, Jet gets cut on his arm and Katara heals him. This will make Aang jealous, since he likes Katara, and Sokka would at first trust Jet, since he would see a lot of himself in him. Jet would then reveal that the Freedom Fighters helped some Water Tribe soldiers kick some Fire Nation ass. That was even a line in the script. Jet tells the gang where they went, and there is now a dilemma similar to the episode Balto of the Water Tribe, but that dilemma is put on hold when Jet's real plan for kicking the Fire Nation out is revealed. In my version, Sokka and Aang would try to stop the dam from exploding, but Katara would briefly hesitate and would remember what the Fire Nation did to her mom. Remember, Katara was closer to her mom than Sokka, and we saw a similar vendetta in the Southern Raiders, so of course she would be tempted to take revenge. But then she would catch herself and realize that she was turning into Jet and would freeze him like in the show. She would then start getting him, but really she's hitting herself. But the executives told me to tone it back in the script, since it would be too dramatic and nuanced for kids. So after Jet is defeated, Sokka and Katara consider going to find their father but decide to talk to Aang about it before making a final decision, only to realize that Aang is missing. They return to the Freedom Fighters hideout to find that the whole place is ablaze, and by Sokka warning the village of being flooded, he had unwittingly told the Fire Nation of the hideout's location, thus helping their enemies to win. Sokka would interrogate a wounded Fire Nation soldier, and he would say that Aang was captured in the attack, so Sokka and Katara would fly away on Appa, and on Appa they would begin to realize that they might have missed their one chance to see their father again, since he might fall in battle, and since they might be on a very long journey, they might never see their grandmother again either. Sokka realizes that their family is crumbling under the weight of the war and that they are gonna have to look out for each other. Sokka can then ease the tension by joking that Aang is sort of like their little brother. Katara fakes a laugh, because she's not sure how she feels about Aang yet, so Aang would be held in captivity by Admiral Zhao, but in my version he is kept in a deep dark hole with a grate over it, since I didn't want to film a child in chains, since it would be too dark. Aang would meditate while in his prison and would start getting flashbacks much like the ones in the storm. Then Aang would be broken out by the blue spirit, just like in the show. An arrow knocks out the blue spirit and Aang sees that it is Zuko underneath and decides to save him from capture. While waiting for Zuko to recover, Aang would have more flashbacks. While Zuko dreams of his own storm flashbacks, Zuko wakes up and Aang appeals to him that they don't have to be enemies, but you know the rest. Aang reunites with Sokka and Katara and they head to the Northern Water Tribe. You will notice that I skipped a lot of episodes, and the reason is simply for time constraint. You see, there have been fan pitches of how the season could be faithfully adapted into a movie that use hypothetical timestamps, and while their hearts are in the right place, they have to understand that motion pictures are best done in the 3-act structure, so having the movie be stalled by 5-minute versions of The Fortune Teller and The Great Divide would greatly hinder the pacing. Now, since I couldn't have 2 castle sieges in one movie, I was forced to drop the Northern Air Temple entirely. When pitching the script to the executives, I proposed that we save the Northern Air Temple for the beginning of the second movie instead of the Avatar State episode, and then Aang can defeat the Fire Nation by going into the Avatar State, and that is where Roku can warn Aang to use that power wisely. The executives then told me to just get the first script done so they can meet their shooting schedule. I assumed this meant that they were putting their trust in me, but in reality they had zero faith in my project, and it didn't help that the movie was getting more and more expensive. Though we had shot the Southern Water Tribe scenes in Alaska, our liability insurance agent said that they would drop coverage of the project if we shot the Northern Tribe scenes on the icy coast of Greenland, as planned. Too many of our actors were minors, and having them act on such a hazardous terrain would be too great a risk. I then pitched that we shoot the northern tribe scenes further south on more rocky terrain. We could cover the rocks with the fake city we would erect, but our accountant got wind of this plan, and when the Paramount executives found out I wanted to spend $10 million to build a fake city in an environment that would destroy it, they were furious. They told me to shoot the northern tribe scenes in a closed set and told me I was on thin ice, no pun intended, so I changed the shooting schedule so we could film the northern tribe scenes in London with a controlled environment, and I commissioned several matte paintings be made to show a vast city with a giant temple backdrop, and they looked magnificent. I even had a prop for the moon that would glow red and then go dark, but in test shootings, it looked too much like the prop in a stage play, so I resolved to just use CGI for the moon. The executives, however, didn't like the matte painting, but I argued that we could put peel-off stickers on it so the effects guys could make the flames of the lampposts flicker and the waterfalls move. I even spent 3 days filming Arctic clouds and chroma keying them onto the sky, but no matter how much I budged on the backdrops, I was forced to concede and use green screens, since blue screens would make the waterbenders a bunch of floating heads, but this would mean rendering nighttime scenes would be more difficult and expensive. Meanwhile, I commissioned the matte paintings out of my own pocket, and they said that, if I ever went over their heads again, they would replace me with Tim Burton as the director and have him shoot all 3 seasons as one movie. I was in hell, but the friendships I made with the cast and crew made it worth while. Much of the fight choreography, rehearsals, and table reads helped me retain my sanity. So anyway, they would meet the waterbending master and he would be a jerk like in the show, and Katara would stand up for herself and all the other girls, because girl power. Anyway, Sokka would fall in love with Princess Yu, and this would lead to one of the scenes that we actually filmed, where Sokka would tell you about the southern tribe and you would explain why her hair is white. If this scene sounds familiar, it is because, when Shyamalan took the helm, he refused to use my script but had the audacity to reshoot the scene with the new actors, but it wasn't 1/10 as good as it was. I still have the negatives in my apartment but am not allowed to show them to anyone until the year 2048. I could break the contract, but you don't know these people. Lord Zed, typical Tuesday, King Ghidorah, I'm on the front lines. But Paramount Pictures, never. So for the climax of the film we have the Battle of the Northern Water Tribe, and for this, I wanted to have a naval version of the Battle of Minas Tirith, and this is where I thought my expertise as a filmmaker would truly shine. I thought that I could film the battle similarly to how naval ships are filmed in a Godzilla movie, where we would fill a stage with water and have impressive ship models float in the water. Then I would use CG artists to make the water appear more oceanic and enhance the ships with extra detail. Lastly, we would film ice cubes exploding against blue screen and composite the footage over a miniature of the city. I even had a small set built that was meant to be the deck of a Fire Nation ship. In this scene, several Water Tribe shock troops would board the ship, dispatch the firebenders, and then turn the ship's trebuchets on neighboring vessels before ramming it into Admiral Zhao's flagship, and Zhao and Ira would jump off and use their firebending to slow their fall and land on some ice as the ship sinks behind them. But the almighty council of executives told me on their high horses that such a battle scene would be too expensive, even though the practical effects would make the CGI relatively cheap. I explained to those jokers over and over again that detailed miniatures, if shot correctly, can fool an audience, and we would only need a large-scale model for a Fire Nation scout ship and battleship for foreground shots, but I got the same shit about controlled environments and consistent visuals. I even wanted to have the Komodo rhinos that the Fire Nation Marines ride into the city to be stop motion like the Imperial Walkers and have small dummies sit on their backs, and for close-up shots, I would rig a mechanical bull machine to look like one of their backs. I told them that, if this is a movie that people are paying to see, that they would want to see a battle that was more impressive than the battles in movies they saw before, but the battle scene in the released film looks worse than the one in The Great Wall. The executives even laughed when I proposed the use of stop motion, and they told me that stop motion is fucking cheap looking, and I blurted out that the only reason stop motion is cheap is because you only ever see it done cheaply in YouTube videos. If you got talented artists to do it right, you would have stop motion, that is, the closest to lifelike. If you need proof of this, go watch a fan's remastering of Jason and the Argonauts where the models now move at 120 frames per second. It's better than CGI and it's infuriating this is not done for major motion pictures anymore. My last idea for the battle is that halfway through the Earth Kingdom Navy would show up to take some pressure off of the Water Tribe. The reasons why are: number 1. We never saw the Earth Kingdom Navy in the show. Number 2, it would show a battle of 3 nations for once. And number 3, it's good to watch the Earth Kingdom win for once. The drill doesn't count. That general was retarded. So Aang would enter the spirit world, but instead of a dragon telling Aang to be a pussy, it is a perplexing and psychedelic world. My first idea was to film the spirit world in Vietnam, where we would shoot in both the jungles and in the country's ancient ruins, but the insurance guy said no way. If you are wondering why, watch Tropic Thunder. My second idea would be to have a jungle set be built in an air hangar, and then for the backdrops, we would have giant aquarium tanks filled with murky water and have moving pictures behind the glass. This would better sell the idea of this being an alternate dimension, and then we would have Code the Face Stealer be an animatronic puppet on a rig that would roll around the floor and then buckle onto the walls, and then we would put the butt of the monster onto the rig in post-production, but the executives were worried that Code the Face Stealer would frighten children. I tried to argue this by offering to make the monster more comical, like have him be voiced by Penjon or something, but they said the voice was never the problem, and in the end I had to tell Studio AD to give me back my drawings of the puppet rig. So my final idea would be to just have him talk to Avatar Roku again in a smaller scale version of my aquarium idea, but they said they wanted to save time and just have a dragon talk to Aang cause dragons are Asian. So back in the physical world, Katara would kick Zuko's ass and Zhao would burn the whitefish, forcing Princess Yu to sacrifice herself and become the moon spirit. Meanwhile Aang would become Koizilla, because this is the fucking moment people who watched the show would want to see in theaters, but I get it. A giant wave is easier to render for first-year Blender students. But based on my history of trying to get these fab kits to let me use practical effects, you can guess how they reacted when I told them I wanted to use suitmation for the monster, in which I would have a silver screen draped over a wireframe and have special ink painted over it, and then make it look bigger with camera tricks and shine special blue lamps on the silver screen fabric to give it that otherworldly look. If you guessed there was no way, you are correct. They said no, and that Koizilla would be too expensive, which is a shame, since there was going to be a scene where Koizilla shoots out a bunch of rays to kill the firebenders and they all die except for Zuko, which is meant to foreshadow his connection to the Avatar. My shooting schedule strictly said to film every scene involving the Fire Nation Navy 3 times, and the reason is that we were going to blow all the ships up for the Koizilla scene, and in my version there would be no survivors, since letting the Fire Nation ships go would doom the Earth Kingdom. Now originally my psychotic brain wanted the movie to end similarly to the Mortal Kombat movie, where they are all celebrating with daytime fireworks and all 3 of them would give each other a snuggly hug, while a happy song similar to On and On would play, and then Aang would extend his glider and fly around as the music transitioned into something more cinematic. But then I remembered that Princess Yu had to die to make this possible, and that it would be more of a bittersweet victory, since it cost them greatly. Plus it would be inappropriate for Aang to be happy, since he and the ocean spirit murdered thousands of sailors and let no one live. So instead I would have Koizilla vanish and Aang would gracefully fall into the ocean, only for Katara to catch him, and Aang would wake up in her arms similarly to when he did in the iceberg, which would bookend the film, only this time Aang would cry instead of smile because of what he was forced to do, and emphasizing that he never wanted to be the Avatar. This might be considered a sappy ending by some, but at least Aang doesn't awkwardly bow to the Water Tribe, while looking like he's trying to hold in a Chipotle diarrhea dump. Meanwhile Zuko would be on a raft with Uncle and he would be wary of all the slaughter and death, but instead of it transitioning to Ozai telling Azula of her task, it would show a single shot of a Fire Nation ship with lightning shooting out of it, and as the camera pans in it rotates around the ship as the lightning gets brighter and louder and the music swells up, until we see that a person is shooting the lightning, and then it zooms in showing that it is a teenage girl doing this, and then she gives a creepy smile with eyes wide with bloodlust. The film then cuts to credits, though, as I said, only 14 minutes of this movie were done, and my final screening to the executives before budget negotiations sections was of a storyboard that used temp tracks. For the music and audio clips from the show for the dialogue were appropriate. For those who are wondering, I wanted to have Bear McCreary do the soundtrack, and the reason is, because Battlestar Galactica's soundtrack is very similar to Avatar's. Watch these 3 scenes from the show and listen closely to the music. See what I mean? Though I liked the soundtrack of the Shyamalan film, it doesn't fit the source material it was trying to adapt and would have fit better for a movie about Vikings or something. Even with all my ideas on how to save money, Paramount rejected my asked budget, saying that it was too high. It didn't help that I had asked for triple the estimated amount rounded up, since I wanted to shoot all 3 movies at the same time and have The Boy in the Iceberg slated for Christmas of 2010, The Blind Bandit slated for Christmas of 2011, and The Fire Prince slated for Christmas of 2012, the reason being that kids age faster than adults do, and I didn't want another Harry Potter situation, where the first movie had all the characters look their age but the last films feel like you're watching a depressing Happy Days episode with magic ray fights and dead people. I even had the first draft of the second movie's script already written. I won't say much about it to save time, but if I had it my way it would have had the cutest and funniest moment in all of cinematic history, because in movie 2, Toph Beifong would say, "Fuck." Yes, Toph would have said fuck in the movie, and if the movie was made in accordance with my vision, Coca-Cola would have shot out of the noses of moviegoers all over the world. But just like Mr. Turner, we can't have nice things. As a last resort to save the dream, I offered to co-finance the film out of pocket and would have even taken out a few loans to almost literally put my money where my mouth is, but it was too late. I was told that M. Night Shyamalan had already pitched his own screenplay and they had signed off on it, and because of grumblings from the marketing department, they were going to completely recast the film. I then stood up and said, "You can't just sacrifice an entire cast like that. Those actors love this movie. How can you betray them?" That was what ultimately got me canned from the project altogether, since, though it was the head of Nickelodeon Movies who I had called out by saying it in the head of Paramount's boardroom, it was the head of Paramount who I had disrespected. So anyway, you know the rest, and unfortunately, I cannot disclose any physical evidence of my version of The Last Airbender ever existing, so just like the pinkness of Tylee's aura, you will have to take my word for it. Later, skaters.